I'm going to introduce our next speaker in stream one. It's Bob Shepherd. You have probably already met Bob through the conference. Bob is a director of the Australian Rangelands Society and is one of Queensland's most experienced soil conservation practitioners. He's an extension officer with the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries in Queensland, based just a little northeast of here at Charters Towers. Welcome to the session, Bob.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. The beef industry trifecta, originally I started this paper with just considering North Queensland. I thought, well, I'll expand it out to maybe the whole of Northern Australia. I'd like to, at the outset, to acknowledge two graziers in the Charters Towers area that provided some very valuable input into this presentation and paper. Roger Landsberg from Trifecta Pastoral Company, and Tom Mann, Hillgrove Pastoral Company. These days, Tom is retired and living in Charters Towers, but I acknowledge their contribution. So the trifecta, well, what is it? It's not rocket science. It's very simple. It's simply the combination in any given year of high beef prices, good seasons, and low interest rates. And so if we look first of all at seasons or rainfall, and the area that I'm actually talking about is north of this line. So that coincides with the Northern Territory South Australian border, extrapolated east and west. So if you like, from coast to coast, from Maryborough on the east coast to Shark Bay in the west. So I'm talking about the area north of that line and just comparing the deciles for that whole region from 1880 through to 2021 and making a call in a few years. So I'll just give you some examples. So there's a bit of a range of some of the types of years that have occurred, and the years I'm specifically looking at are from 1996 forward, and I'll explain why I've picked those years in a little while. So if we look at the 26 years from 1996 to 2021 and use the Decile Data, and I have to acknowledge David Arends from Department of Environment and Science in Brisbane for crunching the numbers to generate this data. It's surprising how many years have been very good. I mean, there's some decile 10 years there, some decile 9s, and there's a few low ones as well, down as far as decile 2. But by and large, out of 140 years, they've been quite good. If we look at Reserve Bank interest rates for the same period, generally a significant decline from around 7.5% down to, at the moment, nearly zero. I guess the rate that producers are paying on debt on beef properties might be another 4 or 5% on top of that base RBA rate, but it certainly is down near the floor. The Eastern Young Cattle Indicator, and this is the main reason I picked that period from 96 forward, because the Eastern Young Cattle Indicator commenced in 1996. For the first probably 15 years, 16 years, up to 2014. It fluctuated around, but really didn't do a lot. It took off for a while up to 2016, dropped back, and then we've had this meteoric rise from 2019 through to the present. And I had a look on Beef Central yesterday. The Eastern Young Cattle Indicator yesterday afternoon was 1,054 cents, so it's gone up a lot more than where this graph is at the present. If we combine all of these graphs in one, we see, and we look for a good rainfall year, low interest rates and high prices. It's really hard to go past the current year, and that is what I'm calling the trifecta for the beef industry. So when we get circumstances like that where the planets align, it really does raise some or generate some options for beef producers. And I think it's important that there's some sort of framework to actually assess these options. And what I've thought people need, or producers probably should be considering, is what we call the 3 business needs. And it's a fairly simple framework to assess whether something is technically feasible, in other words, whether it can actually be done in a particular property or on a particular property. Is it affordable? In other words, can the business actually finance that considered option, or can you borrow money to actually implement it? And lastly, and most importantly, if you do that, is it profitable? But bear in mind that not all issues satisfy, all options satisfy the 3 business needs. So, for example, some serious environmental issues are definitely not profitable to fix up. So, badlands like this, There's very little private benefit in trying to fix something like that up. Technically, you can do something. Affordability, well, maybe, but profitability, definitely not. So what are the options? So I guess the first one is the business as usual approach. And I think considering where the industry is at the moment, if people adopt the business as usual approach, I think they're missing out on a lot of very good opportunities. So there's financial management options, quite a few of those. There's options to increase long-term carrying capacity, options to upgrade infrastructure on properties, options to improve the cattle herd side of the business. There's quite a suite of environmental management options, and there's certainly options to address some of the issues that relate to family and staff. So I'm just going to go through numbers 2 to 7 and just flesh them out a little bit. So the financial management options, the first one you might think is, well, let's pay down debt. But considering how low interest rates are, there's probably smarter things can be done with that money than simply giving it back to the bank. I guess if the bank is breathing down your neck and threatening to foreclose, well, paying down debt's important, but for a lot of producers, it's probably not the best option. So diversification could be an option for some people, and there was a great rundown on expanding cotton growing in Northern Australia and beef on Landline on Sunday. But diversification could also be something on property that's not strictly related to agriculture, so something like on-farm tourism. There's off-property investment. I mean, it could be real estate, it could be shares, it could be managed investments, etc. There could be the option for people that are probably considering leaving the industry but don't want to do it in sort of one hit, is to sell some equity. I mean, this is one business that offers a facility where they match aspiring farmers with retiring farmers, and there's no doubt there's others. But I guess for producers that consider this option, it's important that they have a fairly good agreement where if things don't work out, they can back out of it. And then there's the option of actually exiting the industry and removing yourself from the industry in a fairly quick time. I suppose the thing with this is that for someone that's been in the beef industry for 50 or 60 years, it's important to have some sort of a retirement plan. Options to increase carrying capacity. So obviously, probably one of the main ways of increasing carrying capacity is actually to improve land condition. And there's no better way than to look at what I've called the grazing land management basics. So, and we've heard it from several presenters already, to match stocking rates to carrying capacity by using forage budgets. The adoption of wet season spalling, using fire as a management tool to manipulate pasture composition or maybe control exotic woody weeds that are susceptible to fire. The option of using sown legumes if your climatic conditions and soil types are suitable. The option to control pests, particularly serious feral animals like pigs, camels, or chittle deer, in our case in Charters Towers. Moving away from the home property, for areas that have had a good season, often there's agistment available at a reasonable price and good quality agistment. So some people may elect to access increased carrying capacity by adjusting elsewhere, or going the whole hog and actually purchasing more land. But I guess buyer beware, because we all know land values are through the roof at the moment, and it's important that if one component of the trifecta falls away, that the debt can still be serviced. Upgrading infrastructure. So there's the usual culprits of fences, waters, etc. And I guess with infrastructure, it's important to look at where it is and how effective it is, and whether it is actually serviceable. So for stuff that's not serviceable, I think people have got to be fairly critical about whether they put the same thing back in the same location. In other words, to work to some sort of a infrastructure plan for the property. And don't allow infrastructure to just that's abandoned to gradually decompose into the landscape, particularly cattle yards, because they can present serious chemical residue risks in livestock. There's a great array of high-tech options that are gradually replacing or making smarter decisions possible with regards to infrastructure, walkover weighing, remote monitoring of water and cattle, virtual fencing, etc., etc. And the last one is for people that have staff and probably the company properties is accommodation. Really, these days, staff expect a high standard of accommodation, high capacity Wi-Fi access, nice surroundings. And as Tom Mann said to me, he said, make sure they got good beds. I guess Tom spent a fair bit of time in shearers' beds in the late 40s and early 50s. On the livestock side of the business, herds are depleted on a lot of properties. And so there's an option to increase by either buying cattle or breeding up. With cattle prices, I think a lot of people are going to elect to breed up. That then gives people the opportunity to access some better genetics. So people need to get familiar with EBVs, how to understand them, how to use them, because there's over 20 EBVs for various traits that are potentially very valuable for the beef industry. But ensure that the grazing land management, animal health, animal welfare, animal husbandry practices allow for that genetic expression to occur. Environmental management. Water quality is a big issue, not just in the reef catchments, but right across the northern grazing lands. And good grazing land management really ticks a lot of boxes for good water quality. Woody weeds, important to adopt integrated pest management principles because you can spend a lot of money and not have a lot of benefit on weeds unless you work to a well-defined plan. For bad lands and legacy mine sites, there's very little private benefit in fixing these things up, so exclusion of livestock is probably the only option. Some legacy mine sites are real hotspots for heavy metal contamination, so there can be some benefit for livestock from keeping them out of those areas. For family and staff, training is probably the big one, and it could be technical training, or it could be on-the-job training. If you go back 30 years, the mining industry had a terrible occupational health and safety record. That is now largely fixed up. Agriculture is now the #1 for the poor track record. In agriculture, the beef industry is the worst. So there's a lot of potential to improve workplace health and safety in the beef industry. Succession planning is a big one, and I find that producers and families are doing succession better now than they have been probably a generation ago. Just in conclusions, the trifecta really is a rare occurrence, so make the most of it. For most producers, the trifecta may only come along once, or if they're lucky, twice during their tenure on a property. However, the best options are very seldom clear-cut, so access expert advice, and that's across a whole range of fields. So the technical information, financial advice, legal advice, access people with good life skills, people that have got good facilitation skills, particularly when it comes to succession planning, and the need for the use of development of mentor-mentee relationships. So I've covered a lot of territory there, but hopefully there's some food for thought, and I'd welcome feedback. Thank you.